Hi, this video is a continuation of these two videos here. You don't really have to go see either of them if you want to watch this one. You'll just be a little bit spoiled on the previous rankings if you care about that at all. But in case you're jumping in here at the end, I'll quickly explain what I'm about to do. Premergers is a term to describe people who have never officially made the merge. In Total Drama, there's been about 22 people who have never made the merge, and the three you see on the thumbnail, Noah, B, and Don, are the last three left to rank in the top 3 positions when it comes to how well they played the game.
Mom and Dad, I'm doing fine. You guys are on my mind. You asked me what I wanted to be, and now I think the answer is playing C.
In the number 3 position, I have the last person left here to play 2 games where they made the pre-merge and be from the first generation. I have Noah. Noah was a bit of a struggle for me to place because if you watch the first part of this, all the way back down here, I have Leonard in the 21 spot over Stacy, mostly because I boost his strategic score slightly because of what he did in the Redonkulous race. And the Redonkulous race obviously really isn't Total Drama to any degree, but I still decided to include it because he didn't make it that long and there wasn't a whole lot to factor into the score anyway. But it stands to reason that if I included Leonard's Redonkulous race game, then I should also include Noah's Redonkulous race game. But I decided not to. As I said before, Redonkulous race isn't Total Drama. It's a completely different show. And when it comes to Leonard, his team got eliminated first. So even though there's no official merge or midpoint of the season, Leonard definitely didn't make it. And I think if we were trying to visualize a merge for a Redonkulous race, Noah probably did make it because he made it past around the halfway point of episodes. And I know not every merge happens at the halfway point of episodes. Still, Noah made it further than what I would classify as the merge halfway point, ends up making me exclude his Redonkulous race game in this ranking. I guess you could also make the claim, since I didn't include people like Beth and Justin because they made the merge in one season, that Noah should be excluded from this ranking altogether because he technically made the merge Redonkulous race, but I don't really see it that cut and dry. Again, there's no official merge of Redonkulous race, and Redonkulous race is already a completely different game, so I still included Noah, but just cut his Redonkulous race game, and his Redonkulous race game was really good. I think any big issues I had with him in his previous games really got ironed out in that season. He became a lot more sociable and easy to work with. He became really strategic in an intelligent way. He even became more challenge reliable. But when cutting that game, he's left with a much less impressive resume. Definitely think he would have been here 1 if I was including his Redonkulous race game. But because I'm not including his Redonkulous race game, and I'm also factoring in both his World Tour and Island game, and his Island game really sucked, I can't reasonably put him much higher than a 3. And since we're talking about that little dig at his Island game, let's go into his first factor, which is definitely the most influenced by his terrible Island game, his sociability. Wait, you wouldn't really know what the metrics were. If you haven't seen the other parts, the way I'm ranking everybody, I ranked everybody in this entire list, was off of 3 metrics which I gave them a 1 out of 10 score of: sociability, strategic ability, and challenge ability. I'm not going to go too in depth to them because I've already talked about them in previous parts. Also, I think the name basically explains it, so you won't be too lost. His sociability is how well he got along with other people, how much he outcasted himself, how many good, positive connections he made, and Noah's Island game might be one of the worst sociable games ever seen in Total Drama. He has such a large superiority complex. He belittles his entire team. He thinks he's above the game of dodgeball and he's above what they're doing and he's so much smarter and cleverer than them. And it'd already be one thing if Noah was just a really arrogant asshole. He just didn't really care what people thought of him, kind of like Duncan's game in Island when we're looking predominantly at the pre-merge. He was an asshole, but that was because he didn't care and he knew he was brushing people the wrong way, but he didn't care enough to fix it. Noah was a complete arrogant dickhead and still was confused why he got voted off. Terrible work. Now his World Tour game is much better than his Island game. He's not nearly as demeaning to others. He still has those issues, but it's not nearly as bad where he outcast himself from his team. And he still made pretty strong connections with both Izzy and Owen. My issue with Noah's social game in World Tour is that not a lot of it feels very active. It never feels like Noah truly made an effort to get to know somebody or be considerate. Owen is basically only Noah's friend because Owen finds him funny. Noah isn't really trying to be friends with Owen. He seems to genuinely have a big distaste towards Owen actually because of his gross childish ways. And even though I do still think they're friends and Noah still probably views them as friends, he definitely doesn't think very highly of Owen. And we're going to get into his strategy with his elimination episode later for a strategic score because there's a lot to talk about. But when it comes to that move as a whole of talking to his team when they're alone alone to begin to plant those seeds of distrust in Alejandro, I hardly find much of that to be the issue with Noah's elimination. What I really find the issue be with his elimination is the way he socially handles Tyler, because Owen and Noah forgot Tyler on the torture rack, and then when Tyler got captured by Jack the Killer, which Ezekiel, he got taken with Alejandro, where I have no doubt in my mind Alejandro was manipulating the hell out of Tyler in that, like, oh, they forgot about you, they really don't care about you, I understand your pain, they were talking bad about me, I can't believe that, I was just trying to help the team. Like, even though we didn't see those scenes, I have no doubt in my mind with the way that Alejandro is, that he was implanting all those things in Tyler's head, and had Noah just been more socially conscious about Tyler and cared about him a bit more, to the very least just remember he's on a torture rack and continue him in the challenge, then Alejandro wouldn't have been able to poison Tyler's mind against Noah and get him eliminated in that vote. Noah would have had a significantly better chance of surviving that vote had he been able to manage the relationship with Tyler a lot better. Now when it comes to the strategic aspects of that vote, there's obviously a lot you can forgive him for because he got screwed over in a lot of ways, but all those ways that screwed him over are things I relieve strategic score for, not his social game. He could have coddled that connection with Tyler and gotten things to go his way if he had made that effort, but he never ended up doing so. So combining his, what I'd consider like a slightly below average game in World Tour, for not making that connection with Tyler, and then his really miserable island game where I'd probably call it like a 1 out of 10, maybe even like a 0.5 out of 10, I decided to land Noah with a sociability score of 3 out of 10. Next, let's talk about Noah's challengeability. It is a little bit interesting. I don't think there's a lot of nuance there, and I don't view Noah as a super helpful challenge asset. At really many points of the season, he's obviously super intelligent, but none of that really ended up translating into challenges. He is not like a team player, a kumbaya mindset of let's work our best and our hardest to try and get this done. And I do think in World Tour, he's a lot better when it comes to that aspect, where like Alejandro will say like, hey, can you go do that? And Noah will do it because he still wants to win the challenge. He's not like in this whiny mindset as he was in Island, but because we're including the Island game, we still have to factor the fact that he was a whiny baby in Island when it came to helping his team. Even though I don't particularly view Noah a predominant challenge asset, I think his World Tour game showed he wasn't a hindrance. He never cost his team time, he never cost his team a challenge, he never interfered with his team's success, and before, when his team told him to do something and he had to do it for the team, he'd do it. And when I say that, I'm mostly thinking of the Paris Challenge in World Tour, where Alejandro tells them to go through a bunch of deadly lasers, and Noah, with like no question or no real issue, goes through those lasers to get the statue piece for his team, which I think shows a lot of growth from his Island game. And he also had the really clever trick with the Yeti to like pretend to throw a ball so the Yeti would leave them alone, and that's really impressive and also helpful in that challenge. I consider his challengeability game in World Tour maybe a 5.5, and then I consider his challengeability game in Island. He obviously doesn't end up helping his team, but even in Island, he's not necessarily a hindrance. Like, I don't think Noah would have been good at dodgeball had he gone into the game. He was kind of helping his team by not going into the game. It was just his attitude that really rubbed the team the wrong way. A 4 out of 10 for his challengeability, which I find to be really fair. Again, he's not really too much of like a team player, and he's not really super helpful in challenges, but he does still have his few moments where he helps out his team and shows a willingness to be a part of the team. Next, let's talk about Noah's strategic ability. This is a loaded area to talk about, mostly World Tour. So first, let's talk about his Island strategic game. Don't think it was good, but I wouldn't call it bad. I do think I'd land him around like a 4.5, because the issue is that Noah didn't stay long enough for us to actually see if he had a mind for the game, if he had any strategies or plans. And I definitely think Noah, being the way he is, and given what we saw in World Tour, would have had plans and strategies to make it further in the game had he made it further in the game. And I think Noah is extremely similar to Gwen in the sense that Gwen at the merge phase was kind of like, I don't really want to be here, this place sucks, but I've already made it this far, so I might as well try to win the money. Noah to me is like that. I definitely don't think he's on the show for like the experience or to make friends. He definitely is on this show to win the money. So his motives in Island are definitely right. There is an issue still of like, how could he not realize he was ostracizing his entire team by being so egotistical, but I knock that more in his sociability than I do his strategy. Noah's really complex World Tour strategic game. It's so difficult to judge because Noah had all the right intuitions, didn't have the right execution. And it's unfair for me to even say that because he didn't really do anything wrong. It was just a happenstance that all those things would happen to line up the way they did, where Alejandro heard him talking bad about him through cameras in the challenge. Noah and Owen had won the challenge for their team, and they still had to go to elimination. Now, even though I definitely think Noah was screwed over when we look at like that round specifically, like he shouldn't have been eliminated, I don't think it really matters even if they didn't go to elimination that round. Alejandro definitely wouldn't have taken his target off of Noah, and Noah doesn't have anywhere near the social social ability of Alejandro to save himself. So Noah would have just got eliminated later in the season, so I'm not going to factor in the fact that Noah got eliminated in a round when he should have, as like he would have got eliminated anyway, just in a later round. But there is stuff to talk about when it comes to his approach of telling his team about Alejandro, because I really don't know my feelings on it. On one hand, I think Noah probably should have been trying to plant those seeds a lot sooner. It shouldn't have even had to been a thing where he was telling his team like, we have to get rid of Alejandro now. Just like little subtle jabs to his team about how well Alejandro works with your team and how Alejandro's talking to all these girls in Team Victory and they happen to be going pretty soon after. Like, he doesn't have to be hard accusing Alejandro. He just has to be planting these little seeds. The problem is I don't even know if that's the right move for Noah, because as we know with Tyler, he's someone who can't keep a secret. And had Noah found time to talk with Tyler, like, you know, say Alejandro goes to economy class to make fun of Team Amazon and Heather, Noah takes a chance to quickly talk to Tyler about Alejandro. When Alejandro comes back to first class, he might notice that Tyler's being really quiet and Tyler's being nervous, and then it might get tracked back to Noah anyways. So I can see the reasoning in Noah's mind when the three of them are on a challenge alone to take that opportunity to talk to his team about Alejandro. Now, we've had a challenge in the past that's similar to the sort of killer challenge in Island, where Chef was psycho killer and all the people quote unquote killed were just captured and taken to the arts and craft tent where they watched the entire challenge play out through cameras. So given that previous challenge, it could be reasonable to say that Noah should have known that, you know, his teammates weren't actually being killed because it's a reality TV show and Alejandro might be watching him. I would judge Noah a lot harder on that front had he actually been in that challenge. He didn't make it to that challenge on Island. He hasn't had any experience like this, and even though I don't think his time was the most opportune and he should have still been planting little seeds, at the very least with people like Owen and Izzy, and maybe like hold off on telling Tyler later because, you know, he doesn't have a stronger connection with Tyler, I still just think there's a bit of an issue in the way Noah approached it. But I honestly don't judge him too much because, again, I think he's a victim of circumstance. Had there been any other challenge where Alejandro happened to not be watching him through cameras, Noah would have eventually got his team to go against Alejandro, and that would have been successful. I don't know, but he would have at least had the surprise element that Alejandro doesn't know he's gunning for him. So even had Noah not succeeded in the pre-merge at like flipping Tyler or whatever, he still could have probably made the merge under the radar without Alejandro knowing he's targeting him, and then orchestrated some sort of move at that point. So Noah had the right instincts, he had the right intuition, and he just got screwed over. So his strategic score in World Tour would have been probably like an 8.5. He did really well at having all the right instincts, but when we're still factoring his island game into that score, I ended up dropping him down to a 7.5, which is still really good. It's above average. He definitely had a mind for all these things, and given the fact that he didn't have any execution of votes that actually ended up working out, and now actually thinking about it, Noah wasn't a part of any vote out that wasn't his elimination. That's kind of weird. I'm actually considering bringing him lower when I think of that, but no, I'll keep him with 7.5 just because I already have all the numbers set up, leaving Noah with a total of 14.5. The second best pre-merge player of Total Drama is Dawn. We'll obviously talk about being a bit who's naturally first if you can deduct that puzzle. But first, I'm gonna put a spotlight on Dawn because I severely underestimated her game. If you look at the thumbnail I made for the first two videos I did on this topic, I had 3 people on the cover saying lowest to highest, going from red, orange, and green, and I had pre-merge contestants in all those areas. For green, I had Noah because I regarded his game very high. I had Leonard in red because I regard his game very low. And in orange, I had Dawn, because when I first thought of doing this video, I did not think of Dawn's game as a very impressive game. Noah and B are up this high mostly because they're really superior in one aspect of, the 3 factors I talked about. Noah is really strategically savvy, B is a crazy inventor who's really helpful in challenges. Dawn doesn't really have anything like that. She's not super amazing at challenges, she's not really strategically involved, and she's definitely not super socially adjusted. That's actually the reason she's up this high, is that she's not super bad in any category. Even though Noah is very strategically savvy, he's also pretty socially inept from what we saw in his 2 seasons. And just like Noah, basically everybody else on this list below Dawn has at least one factor that they're pretty bad at. But Dawn doesn't have that. She has an extremely well-rounded game. To get out of the way, because I think this factor is definitely not surprising when you look at Dawn's game, I want to talk about her challenge ability. There is not a lot of prelude I can give to this score. I gave her a 7 out of 10 when it comes to her challenge ability. She's really good at challenges. I don't think there's a single way in which I can point out Dawn being a hindrance to her team in any of the episodes we see. She has so many extremely helpful skills when it comes to challenges. She's an animal whisperer, so she's really good at working with animals and getting them to do things she needs them to do, similar to an Ella, but the better an OG, Ella because she doesn't have to annoy anybody with her singing and get distracted like that. She's also really good at working with people. In the first episode, Dakota was at the top of the rope, and being the way Dakota is, she didn't know which way to use a saw, and everybody was really annoyed with her and how dumb she was, and was pressuring Dakota and making her more scared. But Dawn, being able to read people, was able to just talk with Dakota and explain it in terms that made sense to Dakota. Something like, imagine it as like daddy's steak knife, because knives have teeth side down, and Dakota was trying to use the non-teeth side down, so Dakota got it. So Dakota understood it better thanks to Dawn's instructions. Those alone already easily put her above average. There's another part to her challenge game that's also really impressive. In her elimination episode, when Lightning, which was the driver of their boat in the challenge, got shot, and her entire team was kind of like forced to stop and readjust, Dawn was very quick to take the leadership position, reorganize her team, and her team would have won that challenge thanks to her quick work on getting them back on track if it wasn't for Scott throwing the challenge, which is the case for basically all the challenges for this team. They would have won a good majority of them had Scott not been Scott. I almost think there's an argument for Dawn's challenge score to be even higher than 7.5. The only issue I have of ranking her higher than 7.5 is we don't actually see her work in challenges ever really amount to a whole lot. She's definitely an asset in all the challenges she's in, but she wasn't a super central or core part of her team's work in those challenges, because I definitely think somebody else is a lot more so that. Next is Dawn's strategic ability. She is someone who's similar to a lot of people on this list when it comes to the fact that I don't view her as somebody who necessarily cared about the game all that much. In her elimination scene, she reveals that she only came on the show to I don't remember, collect wood from the show, to auction off for money, to start a fund to save all the poor tortured animals on the show. So by virtue of that, I think it's pretty reasonable to say that Dawn's head wasn't really so much focused on the game, but I view her in a much higher regard strategically when comparing her to those people who came to the game with not really sole intent purpose or extreme caringness to win, like an Anne Maria or like an Ella or like a Dakota. I view Dawn in a high regard to those people because in her elimination episode, in the very last few minutes, she displayed a really impressive understanding of what happened in that challenge and how Scott was guilty for throwing the challenge for her team and Scott is a traitor and they need to eliminate Scott. All of that was really, really good, and had she been able to actually act on it, I definitely would have put her at around a 6 for being able to orchestrate a strategic vote. That was the right move, but obviously she didn't end up doing it, so I can't rank her that high. And had her plan just failed, I still would have put her at a 5 for showing the right mind of what move she needs to make to get rid of Scott. The issue I have is her strategic approach was completely wrong. She basically voiced entirely what Scott did and why Scott needs to go in a confessional, but she doesn't ever actually talk to her team about it, which is completely idiotic. Had after the challenge ended, she had just talked to her team and been like, well, how did Sam get shot? If Joe's gun is jammed and they catch Scott as a traitor in that moment, Scott wouldn't have been able to switch it around on Dawn. Scott would have been in trouble for sabotaging his own team, and Scott would have got eliminated. It was really that simple, that easy to get Scott eliminated that round, but Dawn instead decides to keep that to herself, reveal it in a confessional, never end up talking to her team about it. Now, I'm aware this is really unfair because the only reason Dawn handled the situation the way she did is for plot convenience. They needed her to go and Scott to switch it around on her, and Scott wouldn't have been able to defend himself had Dawn pointed that out after that challenge. But none of that changes the fact that when I'm trying to look at her game as realistically as I could for a human who doesn't have all that plot structure around them, Dawn made an absolutely moronic move in deciding to not confront Scott immediately. Not even mentioning the fact that she has a snide comment towards Scott after the challenge, basically implying hey, I know you're bad. It severely dropped down her score. So weirdly enough, this is a situation where Dawn's strategic score was brought up a lot for having the strategic awareness of what Scott did and how Scott has to go, but it was also dropped just about as much as it was brought up for not correctly acting on that knowledge. So this is the biggest low point of Dawn's game, giving her a strategic ability total of 3.5. And lastly, let's speak on Dawn's sociability. This is one of those factors I think is kind of similar to a Sam if you watched part 2. He's a character that kind of sweaty, awkward gamer. You'd expect him to not be very good with people. Dawn is extremely similar in that regard. She's really obsessed with nature and meditation, and she's always off on her own. She doesn't really interact or seem to care about people all that much. Her stereotype doesn't really seem like somebody who would interact or even particularly care about people a whole bunch. And all while that does kind of ring true to Dawn, especially super early on, she doesn't seem to be very interested in getting to know people a lot. And when she does, she makes them very uncomfortable by reading their auras and being super blunt with them. And like, she basically tells Zoe in the first episode, you have no friends and you're a loser. In the beginning of the second episode, she tells Dakota, you have a bunch of emotional issues and you go to a therapist. Like, Dawn does not have the normal social filter that you should have where you realize, I shouldn't say these things to a person because it would make them extremely uncomfortable. And I don't think we ever really see that get resolved in Dawn's time on the show. Even in her elimination episode, she's super cryptic with Zoe about Mike having multiple personalities and just being really weird and nondescript for anybody, and obviously doing this thing I said earlier, strategic score of not really having her head in the game, of just going off on her own to collect wood. She's not making an effort to go talk to anybody. But despite all that, I don't think Dawn's social game is all that terrible. I don't think anybody really ever hated Dawn. I do think they were a bit uncomfortable with her at times, but she did still manage to build some like decent connections with people. She was really close to B because she was able to read what he was like thinking and saying and wanting to do because he was a mute and she could read personalities. She made a pretty good connection with Lightning in the beginning of the third episode where she saved him from choking on a bug, which, you know, could argue has a lot more to do with the bug than Lightning, but still it was something she did that built a better connection with Lightning. And in spite of those moments with people like Dakota and like Zoe, they never ended up targeting her or having an issue with Dawn because of what she said. The only person that ever sort of became an issue with was Scott, but Scott basically had an issue with anybody who looked at him wrong. Even though he said that like Dawn has to go, he didn't end up targeting Dawn next, nor did he really ever seem to have a plan of getting rid of Dawn soon until she found out that he was one to sabotage the challenge. So I regard Dawn's social game as one that's definitely below average because she doesn't go out of her way to make as many connections as she should. She didn't have a particularly strong connection with anybody in the game, and she did still make people uncomfortable at times, but it wasn't in a bad enough way that ever harmed her game as a whole. So I gave her a sociability score of 4.5, leaving Dawn with a total of 15.5, which if you look in like the grand scheme, there's 3 factors, all of them are out of 10. She got 15.5. That's above half the sum total you can feasibly receive, which is really impressive for someone who was only in the game for 5 episodes. At number 1, you guessed it, it is B from Revenge of the Island. I don't really know who I honestly expected to be at the top of this list. It's such an interesting field of people to rank. I mean, all these people are objectively the worst of the worst when looking at the contestants of Total Drama. All of these players have failed, at least to a degree, in some regard. Some have definitely failed a lot more and are a lot more responsible for their elimination than others, but everyone here has at least done something sort of wrong. And one thing I noticed immediately when ranking these people is that it was really easy for me to make the first bottom 11, bottom 15 people, but really when it got to this final 8 or so, that's when it became difficult to actually decide who has more merit. B is someone who was initially never really in my mind when I was making those assessments of who played good games, and I can't even really give you a reason why. B didn't do anything wrong, and I think it more so just stems from the fact that I think there are people below him who have greater potential to make it further into the game had things gone more correct. Like Brick has a really strong foundational character and understanding of the game to make it far. Same with Noah, same with Dawn, even same with like the twins, even like Tyler and Anne Maria to a degree. All are people to me that have potential, do really well, had certain things just gone differently. And even placing B in the number 1 position, I still don't know if I really see B in that same regard, and it's mostly because of his mute nature. It's hard to build connections, and it's hard to envision how well a character can gel into a group or foster connections with other characters when they themselves can't talk. Even in his short stay on the season, the only person he ever really connected with was Dawn, and that's because Dawn could read his aura and tell what he was like thinking and saying without him having to say it. But I don't really know how B would build a personal connection with really anybody else. But pushing all of that potential issues out of the way in my mind and looking purely at what B did in his game, he played an amazing game. He does still have some prominent issues in the way he played the game, but when I am truly ranking this group of people on who played the best game and who I think, if you replayed their season over 100 times, 99 times out of 100, he probably would have made the merge and made it on a more consistent basis than anybody else we've talked about, because there is no reason why anybody should want him gone in a team setting. He's super relaxed, he's super agreeable, he's incredibly ingenious in challenges and single-handedly carries a lot of challenges, even though he never really wins any, but we're going to talk about that in a bit. And I don't really know how strategically involved he is, but just given how vastly intelligent he is, I'm sure he could have adapted to the game had he made it further. Now, with all that ass kissing out of the way, let's start the discussion of B, and I'll get this one out of the way immediately because I think everybody knows this is B's strongest factor. It's stupid how good he was at this. His challenge ability. I don't even know how much there is to say. He competed in 3 episodes, and in 2 of those episodes, he single-handedly gave his team a great chance of winning, and they probably should have won both those challenges, but they didn't in weird circumstances. Obviously, in episode 3, the first part, he got his entire team up the mountain with his incredible invention, and in the second part, he made a reflective mirror to begin to melt the other team's castle that was quickly crumbling, and had it had even like another minute or two, it would have been completely melted and they would have won the challenge. B would have ended up winning that challenge for his team, but Scott ended up being Scott, sabotaged B's mirror, got him eliminated, and B is really the one who did all the work for his team in the very first challenge. The first challenge involved Chris like hanging up a bomb totem for each team that had a timer when it was going to explode, and the goal of each team was to get their bomb totem cut down and then take it to one of the cabins and place their bomb totem to deactivate the timer. I don't know if he ever actually explicitly says this, but it's obviously reasonably implied whoever got their totem to a cabin first would win. And this was a fun inconsistency total drama moment where Team Rat got their totem in front of a cabin first, but then Team Maggot's bomb totem came flying into their cabin, blowing up their cabin, and Chris for some reason was like, oh well, Team Rat's totem isn't on a cabin, so they lose, even though Team Maggot's totem is currently ashes because it blew up. So that already doesn't make any sense, and they should have won the challenge. The only reason they, got that far into a circumstance where they should have won the challenge was because of B. When the challenge first begun, basically his entire team was just standing near the totem, not really doing anything, except for Lightning, who was trying to climb the tree next to them but kept falling over and over, but nobody was making any progress or doing any. Had B not been there, they probably just would have stayed there thinking about what they should have done the entire challenge and never actually got their bomb totem down. I won't go as far to say as they would actually just stand there the entire time, because I'm sure eventually Lightning would stop climbing up and they'd think, okay, well that's clearly not going to work, and they'd try to think of something else. But I don't know if they could think of anything else or execute quick enough to get the totem down. B, with his ingenious invention of creating a human stack to reach the rope, is the only reason they were able to get that totem down in a timely manner. And then as they were riding the totem down a hill, B is the one who had the idea for them to all lean forward, so they go down faster and get to the cabins first, which they did and place the totem, but again, Chris was being dumb and they lost the challenge even though they should have won. So those are 2 challenges already that B mostly would have won for his team single-handedly, barring the stupid circumstances he had to face. And episode 2 is where he doesn't really have those moments where he had to single-handedly win the challenge. That's because it wasn't a challenge that he could do anything to take full control of. The first part was like Chris would say embarrassing secrets about a member on a team and they'd have to reveal it to get a point, which by the way B admitted to and got a team for his point, which shows that B is a team player. And then the second part was a relay race, which B did very good in his part by quickly making a female mud beaver so he could escape. B did really amazingly in his challenges, and I gave him a 9 out of 10, which is the highest score I've given of anybody in any factor, and is probably higher than I give to even most people when considering all the people in Total Drama who even made the merge. Not many people would ever get a 9 out of 10 in one factor. The only reason I don't have B any higher is because even though his mute nature never caused any trouble for him in this season, I think he got pretty lucky with that fact, because had B been, for example, on the Killer Bass in Island, and he tried to move Duncan like by the shoulders to stand in a place to do a plan like he did with Stacy, Duncan probably would have hit him. And because B couldn't explain himself, he wouldn't actually be able to help his team. B got very lucky that there was 1, somebody who could read his mind basically, and 2, that people like Sam and Stacy were willing to work with and let B do his thing that were very agreeable in letting B do what he had to do. But because he can't talk, I definitely think his genius inventions wouldn't be able to be fully utilized because he wouldn't be able to vocalize to his team what he needs them to do. Even thinking really simply, in the third episode when he had made like the rocket couch, Don is the one who had to tell the team B wants us all to go on this couch, but B wouldn't have been able to really do that as effectively if Don wasn't there to vocalize his thoughts. Again, it never really ended up being an issue for him in his season, so I did not get a ton, but I just struggle putting him at a full 10 out of 10. When I think B, especially just in the way he acts, he's very independent. I don't think he's someone who's ever had to really work on a team, which isn't a problem. Again, he has a 9 out of 10. It's not something like I'm knocking him major for not having the best social skills to vocalize what he wants to be done in a challenge, but it is something that will avoid him from getting that perfect 10 out of 10. From the highest mountain to the lowest valley, let's talk about B's lowest score, his strategic ability. I don't know how much B ever thought about the game. That's obviously kind of the issue of having a character like him who never talked. Us as viewers can't get a lot of what's going on in his mind, but based on what I saw in his 3 episodes, which is like a tough metric to judge because not many players play the game really hard in the first 3 episodes, you know, even good players, Duncan or Courtney, don't play that hard in their first 3 episodes, but what I saw from B was not someone who really had a mind for the strategic part of the game. Even when it comes to the Dakota vote out, Scott had basically like talked the entire team before the Dakota vote out, like, we need to get rid of Dakota, and B was not included in the conversation. I might be looking into that a little too much, but the fact that B at that point was already kind of getting excluded from strategical discussions, or at least B wasn't making an effort to be there for strategic discussions, shows a bit an error of what he prioritizes in the game. So because I really have no way of knowing what was truly swirling around in B's head when it came to the game, and he wasn't someone who seemed to really prioritize strategical discussions, especially after episode 3 where he had known Scott tried to frame him, and he doesn't go to like approach his team to at least like try to explain, maybe not with words because he's a mute, but like at least, I don't know, mime out the situation, or go to Don who can read his aura and clear up the situation and get his team against Scott. He just kind of like lets it go, and I forgot to say this for Don with her strategic score, but she made an issue in my mind of voting out B because she had a really strong connection with B, and she very quickly and very blindly believes Scott when he says like B hates animals. Don's just like, oh well, I guess he hates animals now, even though she has no reason to believe that. So I blame Dawn on a strategic sense for not making that effort to go talk to her number 1 when things are being said about him, but inversely I also blame B for not making that effort to get Dawn to forgive him. I landed on a 2.5 for B's strategic ability. I do think it could be argued that he should be a bit higher, but when I'm looking at the objectives of his game, Head never really seemed to be in the game. He didn't seem to have any real plans. He was never really part of any strategic votes. Did the wrong strategic thing by just kind of letting himself go instead of actually talking to his team or confronting Scott. There was never really a moment where he actually did anything right. The 2.5 really just comes from the fact that I don't know 100% certainty that he's not a strategic character because, you know, like Ella, I don't have to wonder if her head is in the game. I know her head's not in the game. B is someone that I have to wonder if his head's in the game, not because he's being so apparently out of the game, because we just don't have enough information about him. So he's kind of neutral in that field, so I boost him up a bit because his head could be in the game and we just don't know. And also, as I said before, B is just really, really smart. I have to assume on some level, had B made it further into the game, he would have at least understood the strategic part of the game. Lastly is B's sociability. This is a complicated one. Obviously, how do you judge the social nature of a player who does not speak? I don't think B was very personable. I don't think he's like Lindsay or whatever, like that type of social butterfly, personable character. He's a very relaxed, you know, reserved, keep to himself, chilled guy, but people still really liked him. Sam liked him, Dawn liked him, Lightning liked him, mostly because B won a lot of challenges, but still, Lightning liked him. Scott is my little baby. Talked about him for a lot of these characters. Scott disliking you doesn't really mean a whole lot to me. So B had, at the very least, more positive than negative social connections with everybody on his team in spite of not talking to anybody. The thing is, I don't put B above average sociability because even though his entire team really liked him for those first 3 episodes, Scott turned his team on B really quickly and really easily. And I think that highlights the big issue with B as a player and B as a mute. He has good connections with his team. His team likes him, but his team never really seemed to trust him. The fact that his entire team believed so quickly, these people didn't feel most comfortable with this guy who never spoke. It's hard to build a strong connection with somebody when you're being framed over doing this terrible thing to your team, and you can't even vocalize why you're innocent. Again, considering his game before Scott had turned his entire team on him, I think he was doing very well and very impressively for someone who obviously can't speak, and I would have put him at like a 6 out of 10 for sociability because, again, he wasn't building like any masterclass social connections or really strong bond, but people did really seem to like him. However, when you're combining that with the fact that his team ultimately seemed to never really trust him that much, it's hard to keep him with that inflated of a position, so I ended up giving him a 5 out of 10 for his sociability, giving B a whopping total of 16.5 for his gameplay. Very impressive for someone who was only there for 3 episodes. Good on you, B. And there you go. That was the top 3 gameplays of Premergers. This has been an interesting topic to do. It's always really complicated to judge something like this because, in my opinion, it's all very arbitrary. It's a cartoon show with cartoon fake characters who will most of the time do a dumb thing to get eliminated for the plot. So in my mind, it's hard to ever really say people play a good game. Even when you look at the people who I consider to probably play a pretty good strategic game like Scott and Heather, they really only made it as far as they did due to a lot of plot contrivance. So can you really like say they're a good player if the only reason they're surviving is because a divine mystical force known as the writers decided they should stay longer? Like, I don't really think so. I don't think that's really fair, and that's also why I don't really see myself ever doing this with every character that ever played Total Drama, because doing it with this select group of people is easy to like point out all the holes in their game and kind of like joke about how bad they all are, but the idea of actually ranking characters actually having really good games, I feel like, especially my metric, which is pretty basic, everything kind of feels like you're trekking through muddy waters at that point. There's not much clarity, or at least to me there wouldn't be a lot of sincerity in the rankings I give, because I'm sure even by the time I get the video out, my opinion would have already switched on some of the characters and who should be top 1 or top 5 or in the top 10, because there's so much complexity when you're ranking a show like this, which doesn't truly have any good gameplay as much as it just has writers writing good gameplay. Anyways, that is all. What If will be out soon. Probably gonna be a small What If the next one I get out because the one I'm currently working on is a lot, but yeah, thanks for watching and bye.